They define a product development partnership as PDPs use public and philanthropic funds to engage the pharmaceutical industry and academic research institutions undertaking R&D for diseases of the developing world that they would normally be unable or unwilling to pursue independently without additional incentives. There has been a proliferation of innovative partnership models over the past, let's say, 20 years or so that really begin to challenge that traditional definition of PDP. So you can also look at organizations that you might call institutional enablers of product development partnerships, those that are focused on facilitating them, investing in them, that are focused on finding approaches to de-risk product development in innovative ways and through innovative models. So here are a few examples from the Innovative Medicines Initiative in Europe, Gavi, a number of examples of organizations or groups that one could categorize as product development partnerships. There has been a great movement over the past decade or so in a different kind of product development partnership, often led by industry in terms of open innovation, really providing access to data, to technology, to intellectual property, open access to that technology to encourage research in areas where industry may not be able to make a direct investment, but where the technology may have, or the knowledge, data, or technology may have tremendous value. There are a number of examples of open innovation platforms or facilities that have been developed by many of the major pharmaceutical companies, Lilly, GSK, AstraZeneca, among others. And then finally, one might think about product development partnerships in terms of a completely different impetus, a completely different motive. That is, those that are industry-led and are really focused on achieving commercial outcomes that are commercially focused. And there are many of these as well. Our traditional definition need not apply when we're thinking about the potential configurations of collaboration among academic, government, not-for-profit, and industry stakeholders. On the left, which would be more of our traditional definition of a product development partnership, the goal, of course, is to focus on global health priorities and to address the lack of commercial incentive. And so I mentioned a moment ago an example being Medicines for Malaria Venture. On the other end of the spectrum, though, you can think about product development partnerships in terms of broadly de-risking R&D to complement a commercial incentive and to create, perhaps in a pre-competitive environment, an opportunity to move ideas forward in a way that de-risks them, but with a focus ultimately on moving those into commercially viable pathways. And then in the middle, you can have initiatives, and IMI as an example, as an investor in these kinds of partnerships, that have dual objectives. In order to understand how this landscape is evolving and how it will continue to evolve, I think we need to think about some of the key drivers that are sort of shaping different stakeholders thinking about the need for product development partnerships and how they will enter into them. So from industry's point of view, of course, a primary consideration is the rising cost and risk in drug and vaccine development, coupled with, in many cases, thinning pipelines and patent expirations. So the motive then behind a product development partnership is not simply, from a global health point of view, corporate social responsibility. It's actually, from a portfolio point of view, an issue of diversification, maintaining diversity in the portfolio. And so it's a very strategic decision to ensure that multiple programs and portfolio within a portfolio can move forward. From a government point of view, of course, unsustainable healthcare costs, increased global competition, potentially uncertain economic conditions are driving the need within government for to support relevant innovation, innovation that will serve the needs of an aging population, or that will serve the needs of a challenged healthcare system, and at the same time that will spur and support local industry. So those drivers are shaping product development partnerships. From an academic point of view, certainly in many jurisdictions in the world, constrained funding for basic science, for discovery science, and also the shifting focus of many funders toward translation, toward commercialization, is actually pushing academic institutions increasingly into product development partnerships. From the not-for-profit perspective, foundations, health charities, among others, there is, of course, among stakeholders, donors, growing expectation, growing demand for accountability and transparency and impact among a very discerning stakeholder community, and that's pushing organizations to demand more of their research investments, and often entering into product development partnerships so that you can move into impact. I think the real purpose of a PDP across this continuum of PDPs is to yield shared benefits that no single partner can achieve on its own. And so there is in most cases, the combination of expertise and resources from academia and industry, so really coupling that discovery science with manufacturing and marketing capabilities. Despite diversity of potential partnerships, there are, I think, at least three common elements. One, of course, is that there's a need in any partnership for defined governance mechanisms that enable appropriate participation in decision-making. Second is the critical need for a disciplined approach to communication. And then, of course, there's a need for IP policies and technology sharing policies that balance the needs of individual partners, which are often very different, with the overall objectives of the partnership. The spectrum of PDPs has widened, and it really ranges from an objective to address market failures, in quotes, in neglected diseases, to broadly de-risking product development in a way that supports multiple objectives, including commercially oriented ones. And I think ultimately there is an appetite to experiment with different partnership models to advance healthcare objectives, commercial objectives, and scientific objectives. And I think that in an era of constrained resources, that experimentation is only going to continue.
What I want to do is kind of give the MHRP perspective as it relates to 144 and P5, and then I want to have a few comments about a public-private partnership that we were, and still are, trying to put together to try and realize our dream of another efficacy trial. So RV144 importance, I think, as I mentioned, that it provided the test of concept that we could, potentially prevent infection, which is a very important finding, and I think it reinvigorated the field. Nina has already discussed P5, and here this slide is the same slide that Nina showed previously with the icons of the various partners. So the goal here is to produce an HIV vaccine that can have public health impact in Southern Africa, because that's the place in the world where the impact is largest. It does differ from the region where the RV144 study was done, and so those differences could be important, but they may not be. So in an era where you've got limited resources, you can't do efficacy trials every place, it's reasonable, if you're going to choose one region, to choose Southern Africa, and that's the P5 direction. But we had always thought that we wanted to have an efficacy trial in addition to those planned for Southern Africa. So our concept was that perhaps if we were able to come together with enough resources, we could have an efficacy trial. And the Thai public health authorities were interested in, if they were going to roll out a public health intervention, partially effective vaccine that would be more than 50%, that they would be interested in implementing that in a high-risk group. And epidemiologically, in Thailand, the high-risk group that's there is men who have sex with men. So this was a summit that we had where all of those various organizations expressed a lot of support. And so you would think that this would be very auspicious towards bringing this together. And unfortunately, stakeholders have various different interests, and most of the stakeholders that we brought together found it very difficult to give money to build a facility for a private organization, for like a vaccine company. So we're in the process now of determining what would be the other products that we'll hopefully work on for the next efficacy trial, while we're still doing, the immunology that I mentioned that will hopefully characterize the RV144 type of immune responses. We'll still continue to do that, but we're looking for a different approach that probably will fit within this AIDS Vaccine Efficacy Consortium framework that will evolve.
I'd like to discuss with you the consortium or public-private partnership, as was discussed earlier, that we formed or are forming to forward the vaccine that Dan Baruch described to you before, which was initially something that Crucell and NIH and Harvard developed through the IPCVAD and other NIH-funded mechanisms in partnership with Crucell. Now, our partnership is just evolving, so I can't really discuss governance methods because we're not completely formed yet. We did find it necessary when we got to the point where we were going into serious development that we should form a consortium or public-private partnership with not only the people involved in the science and the clinical development, but funders. And of course, if you look at the list of people we have, they're very experienced people. And Janssen is not experienced in vaccines, it just got involved in vaccines. And so these partners not only provide physical and financial support, but they provide a lot of intellectual support, a lot of experience, and a lot of know-how so that they can help us make the thing work. So let me just discuss a little bit what our plan is. We trying to make a vaccine that is universal against all the types. And this is a bit of a contrast with the P5, which is a regional vaccine. Now, we're doing this based on the design of our vaccine, as well as the goal of having something that we can license and commercialize in the profitable and the non-profitable markets at the same time. So as I discussed earlier, it does help drive the NPV. That doesn't mean that if the vaccine didn't work in the US and MSMs where there's a reasonable market, but it did work in Africa, we would drop the project. We would just do it in a different format or maybe on a different construction within our company. But it does allow us having a universal vaccine at least to make it more of a traditional approach to vaccines where you would have access commitments which are very strong, but also have a profitable product if it worked. Now, this is the study that Dan showed you earlier yesterday. This data was shown to the president and head of research for our company, Paul Stoffels, and he was enthusiastic enough to say, yes, this is something that we should look at seriously. And so a bit of exciting transformational preclinical data, even though it's not proof, is enough. Of course, we did get some correlates out of this that look promising, and having correlates, as I said before, makes things even easier to develop. And so that was a second reason why we thought we might be able to develop a vaccine using these constructs. This is our high-level clinical development plan, the phase 1/2A, going between 2014 and 2016, and then a phase 2B3 in Africa for efficacy in high-risk populations, USA, Latin America, and Asia, Europe, efficacy in high-risk populations, and additional trials, including potentially Thailand. And we also would like to look at long-term efficacy and persistence of immunity and additional trials. So we'll be starting that in 2017. So as I said, our plan is a universal vaccine where we test in Africa and start shortly after that a phase 3 in the US and Latin America and so on. But how do we select this regimen? Well, we're developing an algorithm And of course, we have to meet no-go criteria that are based on antibody levels being high enough and provide an indication that the elicited antibodies are functional. And so in our consortium discussions, this kind of discussion is a major topic. And I know in the P5 it's a major topic too, because when you get down to it, you have to decide, are you going to take this regimen or this regimen? You can't take them both or all four of them. And like I said, approach has, I think, 14 groups in it, including the controls. So that's what I wanted to say about our fledgling consortium. I have to say that it's a pleasure to work with it. The partners are all experts and dedicated and really just want this to work.
What would you say the role is of the product champion in the partnership, either positive or negative?
It won't work if you don't have one. There's got to be someone, and in fact, in our experience, what we found is that there has to be someone who gets up every day of the week and thinks about that project or that entity and pushes it forward.
There's an interesting thing about product champions. I mean, by definition, a product champion is someone that believes in the product when the data doesn't support it. Because I've said, if the data's all there, a high school student could make the decision. So, but the role of the product champion changes when you go from the discovery and early phase 1 and even phase 2 to the phase 2B, phase 3, and licensure. In the sense that the product champion usually comes out of the basic research or early development and doesn't have the kind of experience that is necessarily needed to make decisions about late-stage development. And so we like to keep the product champion in the program and there, but a little bit at bay.
And it's actually an interesting question, made me reflect on P5 versus the Janssen program, where there's a clear product champion. With Janssen, I think P5, it's less clear. I mean, there are, I would say, champions for different aspects of the program, and there's a collective, I think, feeling around wanting to champion the approach. Sanofi's certainly been a champion of pox vectors for a long time, but I think we also, we don't. It's a different model, and it probably suffers a little bit as a result.
So I'm interested to know whether you balance the product champion on your teams with a product skeptic, somebody who doesn't have, something in the race, but will say the things that you don't want to hear.
This is where things are a little bit different when you get into advanced development, that in industry, you're rewarded for killing a project early before you spend too much on it. So you usually have one product champion, and everybody else on the team is exactly what you described. But if that's not the case, you also have governance committees, the actual people that give you the money, and they are very much challenging everything.
I think that's certainly true with the P5. I think each partner organization is constantly, from their own perspective, I think, critiquing the rationale for everything that's being done, and particularly from the funder perspective. There's, I would say, constant scrutiny of what the plans are. And with the NIH, there are actual formal mechanisms like the AVRS, right, where plans are brought through and put in front of a broad-based group of people to scrutinize and provide input.
Just to add to that, in many product development partnerships, because they're very public, and there is a great deal of visibility to the scientific and broader community, you don't really need to have internally critics, because you have an entire community of critics who are monitoring your activities and your decision making. And I think RV144 would be a very good example of a trial that moved forward in the face of ongoing community skepticism that was unrelenting and sometimes virulent.
And I guess I'd only add that I think we do a very good job of this, and that if anything, it's a matter of balancing that intense scrutiny and review with actually just getting the work done, and how much of that is necessary to get the critical feedback, but then to move forward. And it's one of the advantages of being within industry and exclusively in industry and not reaching out to external partners, is that you have those internal reviews. They are pretty, quite rigorous, but once that decision is made, it is without a doubt full steam ahead. And I think, within the PDP, more public environment, that's usually not the case.